Every time you ask ChatGPT a question, every Netflix episode you stream, every Google search, every online payment, every text message that lands half a second after you hit send, something happens first, somewhere else, inside a building most people will never see. They're called data centers. Beige boxes on the edge of town, no sign, no storefront. Just fences, generators, and silence. And right now, the world's richest companies and its most powerful governments are racing to build them faster than at any point in history. In 2026 alone, the 4 biggest tech companies in America will spend more money building these buildings than the entire GDP of Sweden. A century ago, nations went to war over a resource buried underground. They built navies to protect it. They toppled governments for access to it. That resource was oil. Today, the resource isn't buried, it's built. And it doesn't pump out of the ground. It hums behind a locked door, cooled by millions of gallons of water, fed by more electricity than entire countries consume. This is the story of how data centers became the new oil. Oil fueled the industrial age. Data fuels the intelligence age, and the race has only just begun. If you want more deep dives into the companies, industries, and technologies quietly reshaping the global economy, the ones running in the background while the rest of the world scrolls past, subscribe to Business Blueprints. This is where the next story starts. The next phase of this race already has a name in the industry: the AI Factory. A data center purpose-built not for general computing, but specifically to train and run AI models at maximum efficiency, densely packed with the newest generation of chips. Some companies are experimenting with modular data centers, prefabricated units that can be shipped and assembled far faster than traditional construction, letting capacity come online in months instead of years. Others are betting on edge computing. Smaller facilities placed physically closer to users so that self-driving cars, industrial robots, and augmented reality devices don't have to wait for a signal to travel halfway across a continent and back. Further out, quantum computing looms as a genuinely different kind of infrastructure bet, one that could eventually solve categories of problems classical computers can't touch. It remains years away from broad commercial deployment, but the biggest cloud companies are already building early quantum divisions, unwilling to be caught flat-footed twice. And then there's the opportunity still being written. Africa, with young populations, growing internet access, and abundant land for renewable-powered facilities, could become a genuine computing hub over the next decade. Though that outcome depends on investment in power and connectivity that, for now, remains a work in progress. What's clear is that this isn't a bubble that quietly deflates. It's an arms race for a resource that now touches nearly everything. Every hospital record, every financial transaction, every piece of software the next decade will be built on. Which leaves one unresolved question, the same one that shaped the oil-driven century before this one. What country or company will own the next generation of digital infrastructure? The most obvious risk is the one we just covered: power. If electricity supply can't keep pace with demand, data center construction could stall, regardless of how much money is available. Roughly 40% of announced AI data center projects have reportedly faced delays tied to power infrastructure rather than chip supply, a sign of how real this bottleneck has become. Water is the next concern. Large facilities can consume millions of gallons annually for cooling, and in drought-prone regions, that's triggered real friction with local communities and farmers competing for the same water tables. Some newer facilities use closed-loop liquid cooling that dramatically cuts water use, but it adds cost and doesn't eliminate the underlying electricity demand. Because so much of the world's critical data now sits inside a relatively small number of facilities, they've become high-value targets for cyber attacks and, in some analysts' view, potential targets in geopolitical conflict. Regulation is catching up too. Governments are beginning to ask harder questions about energy use, water rights, and land, and some local governments have started rejecting or pausing new projects amid community pushback. Then there's the chip supply chain itself. The world's most advanced semiconductors are manufactured by a small handful of companies, concentrated overwhelmingly in Taiwan. a geopolitically sensitive location. Any disruption there would ripple through the entire AI economy almost instantly. And finally, there's the environmental question that isn't going away. Even with efficiency gains, absolute electricity demand and emissions from this industry are still rising, even as the amount of computing per unit of energy improves. Hyperscalers have made ambitious climate pledges, but the sheer scale of the AI build-out is testing how achievable those pledges really are. None of this stops the build-out. If anything, it's accelerating. So what happens next? And who ends up owning the infrastructure that runs the future? Start with the chip maker at the center of it all, Nvidia. Its GPUs have become the essential ingredient for AI training and inference, giving it extraordinary pricing power and a dominant share of a rapidly growing market. Then there are the hyperscalers themselves, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, who don't just build data centers, they rent out the computing power inside them, capturing revenue from nearly every company building an AI product on top of their infrastructure. Companies like Equinix and Digital Realty operate a different model entirely: co-location. Instead of building their own private data centers, many businesses rent space inside shared facilities, like renting a storage unit instead of building a warehouse. Equinix and Digital Realty own and operate those shared facilities, collecting rent from hundreds of tenants at once. Behind the scenes, industrial companies like Schneider Electric and Vertiv build the unglamorous but essential equipment: the power systems, the cooling infrastructure, the backup generators that keep every data center running. As demand for new facilities explodes, so does demand for the physical hardware that makes them function. And increasingly, private equity firms like Blackstone have moved in as major financiers, treating data centers the way they once treated toll roads or airports, as long-term infrastructure investments with steady, contracted returns. Every one of these companies is betting the same thing: that computing power is becoming a permanent, structural necessity, not a passing trend. But permanent necessities come with permanent risks. And this industry has plenty of them. Every calculation a computer chip performs generates heat. Multiply that by tens of thousands of chips running at full capacity, 24 hours a day, and you get an amount of heat that would melt the equipment within minutes if left unmanaged. That's why data centers are, in many ways, industrial cooling facilities that happen to also process information. Traditional data centers use massive air conditioning systems. Newer, AI-focused ones increasingly use liquid cooling. Piping coolant directly to the chips the way a car engine is cooled? Because the new AI chips run far hotter than anything that came before them. That cooling, plus the raw electricity needed to run the chips themselves, is why data centers have quietly become one of the fastest growing sources of electricity demand on the planet. According to the International Energy Agency, data centers consumed roughly 415 terawatt-hours of electricity globally in 2024, about 1.5% of the world's total. That number is projected to more than double by 2030, driven overwhelmingly by AI. In the United States specifically, data center electricity demand could rise well over 100% in that same window. To put that in perspective, some analysts estimate that by 2026, global data center energy consumption could rival the electricity use of an entire major industrial nation. That surge is forcing a strange alliance. Tech companies, some of which built their public image on climate commitments, are now signing deals to restart retired nuclear power plants, invest in next-generation small modular reactors, and lock in long-term natural gas contracts, because renewable energy alone can't reliably supply power every hour of every day. Analysts increasingly agree on one point: electricity, not chips, is becoming the real bottleneck, slowing down the AI build-out. You can order a GPU. You can't order a gigawatt of new power capacity overnight. Grid connections and new power plants can take years to build, which means the companies that figure out how to secure reliable power aren't just winning at technology. They're winning at something closer to old-fashioned industrial strategy. So who exactly is positioned to win? Here's a truth most people don't expect. At its core, a data center is a real estate business wearing a tech company's name tag. Before a single server gets installed, someone has to answer questions that sound more like a farmer's than an engineer's. Is there enough land? Is there a river or aquifer nearby for cooling water? Is the electrical grid strong enough? Is there a fiber route close enough to connect to? That's why you increasingly find these facilities in unglamorous places. Small towns in Iowa, rural Georgia, the Nevada desert, rather than city centers. Land is cheaper, power is more available, and local governments are often desperate enough for jobs and tax revenue that they'll offer enormous incentives to attract them. Many U.S. states now offer tax exemptions worth hundreds of millions of dollars to lure a single hyperscale campus, waiving sales tax on equipment, property tax abatements stretching decades into the future. For a small town, landing one data center can mean the largest single investment in its history. But it's not a one-sided story. Communities have started pushing back, worried about strained water supplies, rising electricity bills, and the noise of industrial cooling systems running around the clock, next to residential neighborhoods. Because cooling, it turns out, might be the least understood and most consequential part of this entire industry. The United States currently hosts the largest share of the world's AI data center capacity, well over a third of it, concentrated in a handful of places most Americans have never visited. Northern Virginia, rural Texas, the high desert of Arizona. Northern Virginia alone handles a staggering share of the world's internet traffic. Locals call the region Data Center Alley. It exists because of a historical accident. Early internet infrastructure happened to route through there in the 1990s, and now it's nearly impossible to displace because the fiber, the power lines, and the customers are already in place. China is racing to build its own version, backed by state investment and companies like Alibaba and Tencent, driven partly by a strategic goal, reducing reliance on foreign cloud infrastructure and foreign chips. The European Union has pushed something called digital sovereignty, the idea that a country's data and the infrastructure that processes it shouldn't be entirely dependent on foreign companies. If your hospitals, banks, and government records all run on servers owned by another country, that's a vulnerability, not just an inconvenience. Gulf states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia have poured sovereign wealth fund money into AI infrastructure, positioning themselves as neutral hubs between the US and China. And across Africa, a handful of countries are beginning to attract data center investment, betting that cheap land and renewable energy could make the continent a future computing hub, though it remains an early-stage opportunity compared to the US, China, and Europe. Underneath all of this sits a less visible layer, the undersea cables that physically carry data between continents. There are only a few hundred of these cables in the world. They carry the overwhelming majority of intercontinental internet traffic, not satellites, cables, sitting on the ocean floor. Whoever controls the landing points controls the flow of information itself. That's why governments increasingly treat data centers the way they once treated ports and pipelines, as national security infrastructure, not just business real estate. But there's a catch. All of this expansion depends on two things. Nobody can manufacture out of thin air, land and electricity. And it turns out land is the easier problem to solve. For most of the 20th century, oil wasn't just a commodity. It was leverage. Whoever controlled it could power factories, move armies, and fuel economies. Nations that had it grew rich. Nations that needed it went to extraordinary lengths to secure it. Computing power is starting to behave the same way. Think about what runs on data centers today. AI systems that draft contracts and diagnose diseases. Banks that process trillions of dollars in transactions. Governments that store classified intelligence. Hospitals that run patient records. Military systems that track threats in real time. Entertainment platforms that stream to billions of screens. Oil-powered engines. Data centers power decisions. And just like oil, computing power isn't evenly distributed. Some countries and companies have an abundance of it. Others are structurally dependent on the ones that do. That dependency is exactly what made oil a geopolitical weapon in the 20th century. And it's exactly what's starting to make computing infrastructure one in the 21st. The difference is that you can't see this resource from space the way you can see an oil field. It's hidden behind unmarked walls in office parks in the desert, on the edge of small towns most people have never heard of. Which raises an obvious question. If this resource is this valuable, why are entire nations suddenly racing to build it? And who's winning that race? That single insight turned Nvidia, a company most people had only associated with gaming, into one of the most valuable companies on Earth. In its most recent reported quarter, Nvidia's data center chip business alone generated tens of billions of dollars in revenue in a single 3-month period, up sharply from the year before. And that demand doesn't stay inside one company. It ripples outward. Every AI model needs a data center to live in. Every data center needs power, cooling, and land. Every hyperscaler racing to build the best AI product is now racing to build the physical infrastructure underneath it. That's why, heading into 2026, the 4 largest American tech companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta, have combined to guide for roughly $700 billion in capital spending in a single year. To put that in perspective, that's more than what most nations spend on their entire military in 1 year, just to build server farms. But why would any company bet that much money on buildings full of computers? The answer takes us back to that comparison from the very beginning of the story. When ChatGPT launched, most people saw a clever chatbot. Investors saw something else, a hint at how much raw computing power the next generation of software was going to need. Here's the part most people miss. A regular Google search is cheap to process, a fraction of a watt-hour. Independent estimates suggest a single AI chatbot query can use several times more electricity than that simple search because of what's happening under the hood. To understand why, you need to understand 2 words: training and inference. Training is how an AI model learns, feeding it enormous amounts of text, images, and code, then adjusting billions of internal settings until it gets better at predicting the next word or pixel. It's less like teaching a student and more like growing a brain from scratch, one calculation at a time. Training a single frontier AI model can take thousands of specialized chips running continuously for weeks or months. Inference is what happens after training, and every time you actually use the model. Every question you type, every image it generates, that's inference. And multiplied across hundreds of millions of users, inference is now the larger and faster growing source of demand. Both processes run on a specific kind of chip, the GPU or graphics processing unit. GPUs were originally built to render video game graphics. They're extremely good at doing thousands of small calculations simultaneously. It turns out that's exactly what training an AI model requires. Google and Microsoft followed. Then Facebook. Each one realized the same truth. Whoever controlled the most efficient, most reliable computing infrastructure would control the next era of the internet. These companies became known as hyperscalers, a term for cloud providers who operate infrastructure at a scale most businesses can't imagine. We're talking single campuses with more computing power than entire countries had a generation ago. By the 2000s, data centers weren't back-office equipment anymore. They were strategic assets, as central to a tech company's power as an oil refinery was to a 20th century energy company. But even that boom looks small compared to what happened next. Because in November 2022, a chatbot went viral. And it changed how the entire world thought about computing power. Here's something almost nobody thinks about. The cloud isn't a cloud. When you save a photo to the cloud, it doesn't float somewhere above you. It travels, often thousands of miles in milliseconds, down a fiber optic cable into a warehouse full of computers and gets stored on a physical hard drive sitting on a physical shelf in a physical room, guarded by a physical fence. Think of the internet less like a mist in the sky and more like a nervous system. The fiber cables are the nerves. The data centers are the brain cells. And every single click you make sends a signal racing through that nervous system to be processed, stored, or answered. That's true whether you're checking the weather in Tokyo or trading stocks in New York. somewhere a machine is doing the work. And that machine lives in a building that needs power, needs cooling, and needs land. For most of the internet's history, this infrastructure was invisible by design. Tech companies didn't want you thinking about the warehouse. They wanted you thinking about the app. But that's changing, because the warehouses have started running out of room. And to understand why, we have to go back to when these buildings were just server rooms in the back of an office, long before anyone thought they'd become the most valuable real estate on Earth.